Welcome to Tales from the 90s, your time machine back to my favorite time period, the 1990s. This time we're going as far as we've gone into the 90s. We're going to go back to January 1999. Let's go.
Tales from the 90s never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars and morning yawns. Play kickball in the street, man those days can't be beat. Tales from the 90s never die.
Thanks, guys, for joining us. This is episode 11. I can't believe I've made this many episodes. If you're watching this when it comes out, it's the day after Christmas. I hope you guys, if you've watched it, I hope you guys have enjoyed my bonus episode. Me and my wife sit down and talk about our Christmas memories. That's on wherever you're watching this or listening to this. That's on there too. Had a lot of good video clips I put in that one of just some old Christmas times and stuff. It was a fun one to make. Hopefully we'll be doing more bonus episodes in the future. But this week we're talking all about the first month of 1999. I was 15 at this time, in the 9th grade, living at my granny's house. I talked a little bit about that before, so I won't go into the whole thing about skipping school and all that. That's on one for, I think it was December 98. Yeah, because, it was December 98 podcast. I can't remember which episode that was. They're all on here, hopefully, unless we get banned. But you know the format on here. We talk about different things. I jump around. I don't ever go in the same order month by month, and I don't ever talk about things in the same order. I find with podcasts that some people like it formulaic like that. I find that sometimes they get a little monotonous. So I try to, well, I'm using my fancy words there. You'd think I graduated high school. Spoiler, I didn't. I got my GED. But, I mean, that was all my fault. I didn't try in school, and it ended up being just so far behind that it wasn't even, like, I was literally told it wasn't worth finishing school because you wouldn't be able to get enough credits anyway. So I graduated. I actually part of the National Adult Honor Society for GED, and I ended up getting an associate's degree in medical administration and a master's in criminal justice with a certificate in cybercrimes. So there's my credentials if anybody wants to call me to testify for something. I don't know why I just gave all that. We're off the rails already. No, I was talking about school, so it just led me into that. I'm not going to be talking much about the 2000s, so I won't get to talk much about that part of my life, so there's all that. Anyway, video games. Nice segue there to nothing. But video games, of course, this was the time of the PlayStation 1 and Super Nintendo. PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64. And Sega Dreamcast, of course, came out. It wasn't out yet. It came out near the end of the year. You remember that date, 9/9/99. But it was getting ready to come out. The Saturn, for all the good it tried to do, it pretty much flopped because of that whole debacle about the Sega 32 and the X and the Sega CD, and it was basically Sega of America was trying to put out good products, and Sega Japan was jealous and was mad about the success PlayStation was having and Nintendo was having, so they demanded that they release the Saturn here right after they just demanded they release the 32X. So the consumers were confused, and it showed. And one of the reasons Sega as a console doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, speaking of Sega Dreamcast, it was around this time the Pocket Station was released in Japan. It was for the PlayStation. It was, if you remember the Dreamcast, they had these little memory cards. They're called VMU, Visual Memory Units. And not only does it keep memory, but you put it in your Dreamcast controller, which had an open spot, and it actually had a control. Like, if you look at it, it looks like a little mini game, like almost like a Tamagotchi or a little video game system. Like I don't have anything. This thing right here is about this size, maybe a little smaller actually. I don't know if you can tell, but yeah, that's what it did, and it took memory, but it also you could play games on it. Like for Sonic Adventure, you have the Chow Garden, and it was you could grow these little things called chows. They come out of little eggs, and you grow them, and you take them from like Sonic Adventures, and you can actually put them on this VMU. And there was other games, and you could actually link these things up. Like they connected, and you could play against other people. It was a really cool concept. They didn't get to do much with because the Dreamcast didn't have a long of a life as it should have, due to Sega pretty much going out of the console business. But anyway, the Pocket Station was released for PlayStation, and it was meant to be like that, but it was only released in Japan. They tried to release it, or they were going to release it in North America and Europe, but I guess it didn't sell well enough in Japan. But I think that would have been a really cool thing to see what they could have done with the PlayStation with that. But the only game worth note that came out that I would have cared about at the time was WCW NWO Thunder for PS1. This was a sequel to their Nitro game, which was also a computer game too. But I didn't really like those games. Really, and not just me, a lot of people say this, really the only two games that were worth anything WCW wrestling-wise that came out were WCW NWO World Tour, or was it just WCW World Tour? I can't remember if they had NWO on that. But WCW NWO Revenge is probably their best game, which is one of my favorite games of all time. But a lot of WCW games weren't very good. The early Nintendo stuff, I guess it was what it was. If you like those early Nintendo wrestling games, you'll probably like that. But WCW Nitro was horrible graphics, horrible everything. Thunder pretty much carried that on. It got mostly bad reviews. They added cage matches and battle royals, but pretty much it was Nitro just using a different logo and updated wrestlers. But yeah, WCW not known for having a lot of good video games. Backstage Assault, that was absolutely horrible. I think I'm missing one or two. But yeah, except for those two games I mentioned on Nintendo 64, the PS1 games for WCW were crap. Now, WWF came out with SmackDown on PS1, and that was a huge game. But yeah, WCW definitely missed them. Of course, I never played that game. Like I said, I was spending my time at Granny's, but actually on the weekend, see, I'll go back a little bit in case you haven't heard the story. My mom left Marky Foe, the evil stepdad. She was with a new guy, Steve, who's my younger sister's dad, and they had just got together and moved out of Marky Foe's at the same time, so it was like a whole bunch of changes. We moved to Granny's, but Granny was definitely getting older and couldn't really handle a house full of how many were there? 4. I'm trying to remember how many there was. 4 kids at the time, plus Mom and Steve, who she didn't know yet. She always called Steve Whiskers because of his beard, I guess. She's like, "Where's old Whiskers at?" It was funny. I never heard Granny talk smack to anybody about anybody before. I mean, that's about as far as she went. I don't think she hated the guy or nothing. It's just she called him Whiskers. But yeah, she was definitely getting up there. It was after Papa Jesse had died, and I think she liked having people there, but at the same time, just I was a handful. I know. I make all the jokes about skipping school. I'm not proud of it, and I definitely really hate that I caused my granny that much stress. We had some special times together. I mean, a ton of special times together, but one I don't talk about a lot because it's in the 2000s, so I probably won't talk about it on this show, but it was the time, I can't remember what she had surgery for, but she had some kind of surgery, and I was staying with my Grandpa Wally, my dad's dad at the time, in Price Hill. This was early 2000s. I don't remember what it was. I remember they were having the race riots downtown in Cincinnati, and I was at Granny's house, and I was going to go to Grandpa Wally's house and then come back. I was going to walk miles to get to the bus and stuff to do that. But then I decided not to because there were people literally rioting and burning things downtown Cincinnati where I had to transfer on the bus. Anyway, I'm diverting a lot here. But that was a special time for me because we really got to be close. I took care of her. We would sit and watch Alf. They had just started reruns of Alf again because it hadn't been on since the early 90s since it was on, and we just watched that and laugh, and she let me order wrestling pay-per-views, and just it was a real special time that only I got with her. And it's great having memories with everybody, but sometimes when you get those memories that just you have, it's like it means the world. But all that was to say that I caused her way too much stress with my crap. And I know Josh and Travis, they weren't perfect. They were, it's kids. You all have your daily stuff. I don't want to do homework, or I'm going to fight with, this brother's going to fight with this brother. I'll be fighting with one of them. And how old was Clint at this time? Clint was 4.5 at this time. So, not exactly a baby, but, not in school yet. So he was there full time. Anyway, all this to say that on the weekends, we decided it would probably be best for everybody's sanity and everything. And if we stayed in a hotel, I don't know. Well, I didn't decide it. Mom and Steve did. I don't know how they decided. But we spent the week, not every weekend, but most weekends at a hotel. It's usually at Howard Johnson. I think it was in Norwood. I might be wrong on that. But it was next to Denny's. We wouldn't get to go to Denny's a lot, but we always, whenever we had any extra change, we went over there and the freaking claw machines and a couple arcade games and blew that quickly. But I think we would take food, but on the rare times we would get stuff from McDonald's, and it'd be fun walking down the hallways at night to the ice machine. Just stupid stuff like that you remember that, nobody, oh, you're in a hotel and you went to the ice machine. Well, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was just fun stuff we never got to do before. But yeah, that's just a little bit about what it was like living there. Like I said, I completely wish that I hadn't have done the crap that I'd done. One of the few times I'd ever seen Granny mad was whenever she'd realized that I'd unplugged the phone so the principal couldn't call to tell her I was skipping school. I mean, Mom was there too, but she was working, so she would have, the school would have called when my granny was there. But I'd get home and unplug the phone, and she found out about it, and it was one of the only times I remember her yelling at me, and it really hit me oh no, I'm getting yelled at by Granny, the sweetest woman in the world. So yeah, we all have our regrets and things that. Sorry, I was looking to make sure it was recording. Getting all this out and turned out to be talking to nothing, I'd be mad at myself. But we all regret some things that we've done, especially to people that we remember the most fondly. So we got along after that. It was once I got past that rebellious stage of my life, looking back at it, I don't see how I would have dealt with myself. As a parent, I don't see how I would have dealt with myself. I gave Mom and Steve so much crap and so much trouble during a whole time of change for everybody, and that was probably part of it, was the change. Going through a whole therapy session here today. But yeah, it's just one of those things you look back and you can't change the past. I try not to dwell on it, but I do feel bad the way I acted in the teenage years, especially the 98 to 2000. I was all over the place in my head. But let's see. Let's move on to. There's nothing really much to talk about. Of course, you see the book in the background. If you can see it, somewhere right here, Tales from the Crypt, where I get my favorite TV show of all time. There was nothing going on because they'd been canceled since '96. But later in '99, the third season of Tales from the Crypt Keeper, the cartoon, would come out. And that was their last season. They'd been off for a couple years, so it was kind of a surprise they were coming back. But yeah, nothing else going on in the Tales from the Crypt world. But a couple things that were on TV at the time, some of the newer shows that was everybody watched. One of them was Guinness World Records Prime Time on Fox. It was one of those, of course everybody knows the Guinness Book of World Records. They keep, records of everything from important stuff to just weird oddball, who can balance the most milk jugs on their head. I don't know, all kinds of weird stuff in there. Anyway, we'd always get those from the library, and they'd be like checked out all the time. You'd be lucky if you get to check it out, because usually if it's returned, it's gone by the end of the day again. But yeah, it got so popular there in the mid to late 90s that they made a TV show on Fox about it, and they would do chronicles of people that have gotten the records, and they'd actually have people on the stage there attempting records. I remember, of course, the woman with the freaking fingernails that would curl over, and it was so nasty. And the one I always remember is the people that could pop the eyes out of their heads. They had one, I can't remember if it was the man or the woman that did it first, but then they came back and they had another person that their eyes popped out even further, and they had them both on there at one point. It was a crazy show, but it was one of those shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You see it on syndication all the time today. But when that show was on in prime time on ABC, I can't remember the year that came out, but everybody was watching. The first time the guy won $1 million on there, that was like, everybody was talking about that at school the next day, like huge important news stuff. But yeah, I love that show. And another one that started around this time was Whose Line Is It Anyway? That was on ABC's on Wednesday. It was right after the Drew Carey show, because of course Drew Carey had taken off huge. They gave him this show. If you've never seen it before, it's a take on a British show, the same name, it's the same concept. You have Drew Carey was the host, and Ryan Stiles, Colin Mockery. There was all kinds of. There was people from the Drew Carey show like Ryan Stiles, but and the woman that played Mimi would be on there. But there was other comedians and stuff, and it was basically just improv. They would have different games like Scenes from a Hat, where they pull out stuff out of a hat and you got to act it out, or Greatest Hits, where they'd have the people playing the songs, and there's a theme and you got to make up these songs like you're selling one of those CDs that they used to sell, like 2,000 songs for 5 cents or something. But yeah, and then it was they made it look like a game show. But as Drew Carey always said, the points didn't matter. He was like, 1,000 points, you get no points. It was just, in the end there'd be a winner and they'd get to do the final thing, and then they would like read the credits of all the people like involved in the production, but like do it as a Spanish this or someone from from space, or just whatever. Just, it was a whole lot of fun. It really brought improv to a whole lot of other people, because improv, unless you're like in comedy or in entertainment, not a lot of people, it wasn't a real popular thing. I mean, now you see the success that Curb Your Own Enthusiasm has, where their show a lot of it was improv based on just a loose script. But back then, improv really wasn't a word that people said a lot. Now it's like everywhere, and people see really what a skill it is. I couldn't imagine trying to do improv. I mean, I might be better at it than trying to learn a script. By the way, we don't use scripts here. We just have a little list of stuff. But yeah, those are just two shows that were like hugely popular in prime time then. Couple things of news. Speaking of talking about the news, there was a huge snowstorm that hit like the Midwest around this time, especially. But Cincinnati, we got 10 inches. I remember that. Like, I think it was January 2nd was when that happened. I don't remember the date, but I looked it up, obviously. But I remember it was like huge. And of course, we live in a granny's, and just, there was something special about her house, especially when it snowed. I talk about it in the Christmas episode. Like, especially around Christmas time, because we'd be leaving, like, obviously Christmas, to get, it's dark around 5:30. So by the time we get there, it'd probably be dark, but especially when we're leaving to go home. But it was just, she had so much land around there, and the snow would be sparkling on it, and just, it always seemed like the perfect snow to make snowmen. It was great. And another news thing that wasn't so great for Bill Clinton, the president, his impeachment trial in the Senate began after the House voted to impeach him for the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal. I've talked about that a few times on here throughout the episodes. But being this is the last year of the 90s that we're talking about here in the beginning month, just want to go a little bit into the differences in technology between when the decade began and when the decade ended. Just like, even with video games, you had Sega Genesis that came out, and they were really getting a hold in North America. Their Sega, was it Sega Master System? I can't remember what the first one was, but it didn't really do that well here. But the Sega Genesis blew up and obviously caused Super Nintendo to have to come out, because Nintendo was still, the number one console until Sega Genesis started to overtake them, and then they realized we need to get the Super Nintendo out, and then it was on from there, the console wars. And then I talked about the Genesis debacle, and then coming in at the end of the decade. I mean, if you look at the beginning of the decade, you've got Sega Genesis and regular Nintendo, just Nintendo Entertainment System, whatever you want to call that. And you had, obviously, you had computer games, and you had arcades. Then you look at the end of the decade, we've got PlayStation, which could have been connected with Nintendo if they would have, went through with that partnership. But, Sony came up with the PlayStation, and you see where they're at now with the PS5, but that's now times. But the Nintendo 64, if you look at it graphically, back to the original Nintendo, it's night and day. I mean, they still used cartridges, and they got kind of blasted for that because, Sony and even Sega with Saturn and then Dreamcast were doing discs because you could do so much more with them. The Nintendo stayed with the cartridges until they went to GameCube, and even then they used the little discs. But still, the power of that the Nintendo 64 over regular Nintendo and even Super Nintendo is huge. Add to that, Dreamcast will be coming out at the end of the year, and that was, they partnered with Windows on that, and that graphically blew away the PlayStation and Nintendo 64, but sadly they didn't make it. But just, that's huge differences in the times of year between 1990 and 1999. Not times of year, but different years, I should say. Just in technology in general. I mean, you look at the end of the year, everybody's starting to get, on the internet. You're seeing most commercials nowadays, they always have a website. Go to www.chicken/shrimp/tacos. I don't know. You hear all that stuff now that you didn't hear back then. But, around the mid-90s, they started heavily pushing the AOL and the net speed, the different discs they'd send in the mail. You could get the free trials. But all that didn't exist to the general public in 1990. The internet did exist, but it was used by professionals and computer people. Majority of people didn't have it in their homes. By the end of the 90s, we were getting to where the majority of people were starting. Now, of course, not as much as today. I mean, if the vast majority of people have internet in their house, either through regular connection like Wi-Fi or just their mobile data. That's another thing. I mean, cell phones, well, they still didn't really exist for the most part in 1999. They would blow up. If I ever do some kind of 2000 series, definitely see the difference between beginning of 2000 with mobile technology and 2010. That's another night and day situation. But just like with music, I mean, look at the way, like, pop music in general. I didn't listen to a lot of it. Listen to a lot more towards the end of the 90s. But the beginning of the 90s is they were really trying to find their identity, whether they, some of the 80s hair metal bands, as they're called, were kind of going out of style, and rap and then other types of music were coming in to be more popular. Country was becoming more popular with crossovers, and just the music throughout the whole decade. If I may do an episode on music throughout the 90s, I'll probably do it on country because I'm not really equipped to talk about pop music and stuff like that because I'm not, I didn't listen to it a lot. But country, 100%, I can testify as an expert to that. But and just looking at school, like, I'd started the decade in kindergarten, and I end the decade in 9th grade. That is a huge leap. I could have been 10th grade. No, I didn't. I ended in 10th grade because I forgot. I said at the beginning I was in 9th grade. This was January. Of course, by the end of the year, I would be in the 10th grade. But from kindergarten to 10th grade, it could have been 11th, but I failed 7th grade. But, I mean, just look at the difference of that. You talk about differences there. You go from kindergarten to 10th grade, and all the life changes in between. Like, You don't realize how much, years later, oh, the 90s were this time. You don't realize how much changes in a decade, especially when you're a kid or a teenager. Like, as an adult, you tend to, there are a lot of changes, but you don't tend to, excuse me, hiccup. You don't tend to see, like, your life changes like that much. Like, I can look from now, 2024, this is the end of 2024, all the way back to, like, 2007 or something. And yeah, there's been a ton of changes, but, like, it don't seem that way. Like it does when you're a kid and you're growing up and you become a teenager and then you become an adult. Like, that is a massive time change. And then you're just like you're an adult, and then you're an adult, and then you're an old geezer or something. I feel like an old geezer. I just had a grandbaby born. So I'm going to start getting gray hairs, as my wife would say, you already got them. Nope. Anyway, that's just a lot of, I'm not trying to be philosophical here. I can't even say the word anyway. But just ton of changes. And I may talk about a little bit more of those changes when we actually get to the last month of the year. I haven't done the first month of the 90s, and I haven't done the last month of the 90s. Maybe I'll do some kind of comparison show. I got all these ideas running through my head as I'm doing this show. Speaking of music, though, we'll go into music. Oh boy, Billboard Hot 100. I talked about this in the December 98 one, because this was number one for 4 times that month. It was also number one for twice this month. R. Kelly and Celine Dion, I'm Your Angel. Yeah, I'm sure you're somebody's angel in prison. Don't be dropping the soap in there, and don't be peeing on people. Anyway, another number one for 2 weeks was Have You Ever by Brandy. I actually remember that song. Like, it was when I was starting to get into the music. I actually remember that. And then, of course, a song that was number one for the last week in January and would be number one for one following week in February was Britney Spears, Baby One More Time. I was surprised that thing didn't last longer at number one. I remember when that video came out, because it'd come out like when we were still at Marky Fo's. I guess but it like took forever for it to become popular. Like, it was on the Channel 25, the one that the ECW aired on, where, new videos and stuff where they, put the brand new stuff. And I remember that being on, like, mesmerized. Obviously, I'm a teenager, so it's Britney Spears. I'm drooling over, of course. I think she was close to my age. I can't remember. I think she was like, no, I don't know. She was older than me, but not by a whole lot. But anyway, of course I was drooling over her, but I mean, the song at first I was like, what the heck is this? And it started getting more catchy. Of course, everybody calls it cheesy nowadays, but I was surprised to find it was only number one for 2 weeks, as massive as that song was. Like, it certainly lasted. But American Country Countdown there was a lot of songs on here that, in the past you used, for pop, I should say, a lot of songs are number one for like multi-weeks. Like, there's been some podcasts I've done where the same song has been number one for like 2 or 3 months straight. But in country, it's always a lot different, because there's a lot of songs that come out, a lot of good songs, so they're always fluctuating with what's number one. To start the month was Tim McGraw's Just to See You Smile. Great song. Terry Clark was next with You're Easy on the Eyes for number one, which actually been number one the week before this month started. So, Tim McGraw took the spot, and then Terry Clark took it back. That was a great song, too. Alan Jackson's Right on the Money. That was a fun kind of song. It's kind of, the melody for it's kind of quirky, if you ever heard it. It's called, like I said, Right on the Money, if you ever listen to that. The melody of it's kind of quirky, and he's whistling in it. It's a fun song. Martina McBride, Wrong Again. Definitely not a fun song. That's a heartache song. No one can do him better than her. And then Jodie Messina was like hot at this time. She had like three or four songs almost on the charts at the same time. But Stand Beside Me went to number one, and then for 2 weeks following the next month. But also during this time, they had the American Music Awards, which is, the awards for everything. I wouldn't watch a whole lot of those, because there'd be a lot of them on there I don't like. Like, get to the country stuff, and they maybe have a couple country performances and then the awards. But I'll just go through some of the awards that were given out. Concert of the year, which is like their entertainer of the year, went to Garth Brooks. I mean, he beat everybody. Pop music, rock music. So that really shows how huge he was at the time. He beat out the other nominees for that were Celine Dion, Shania Twain, Backstreet Boys, and Metallica. If that tells you anything. Favorite pop or rock male artist was Eric Clapton, which I kind of find strange. Like in '99, I didn't realize he was that popular then. Female for that award was Celine Dion. Of course, this is right after the Titanic soundtrack and her song "My Heart Will Go On" blew up. Rock band, duo or group Aerosmith. This is when they had their resurgence in the late 90s. They were huge then. Favorite new artist was NSYNC, which of course I didn't like at this time. Later in like 2000s, I started getting into them and Backstreet Boys, and like if there's always that war between Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, which one was better? I found I like Backstreet Boys better, not just because they lasted longer, but I don't know, just something about their songs seemed to have more meaning than NSYNC songs. Not that I didn't like NSYNC, it's just, and maybe if they'd have lasted longer, like Backstreet Boys, not to get off on another tangent, but they came out with the album Never Gone in like 2005. It was more a rock sound. It was a more grown up sound. That by far to me is my favorite album of theirs. It's got the pop in it, but it's got rock in it, and it's got a lot of just good singing, good songs. The instruments sound more like instruments than just like, computer generated stuff like some pop can sound. Anyway, favorite male country artist with Garth Brooks, of course. Favorite female country artist, Shania Twain. She was huge at this time. I can't understate that. Favorite country band or duo, Alabama. That was kind of towards the end of their career. But I could do a whole podcast on Alabama. I might save one for that, because that group, like, just there's something about that group that, well, there's a lot of things about that group that I can say. They're so amazing. Favorite country album was Garth Brooks' Sevens, which had come out a couple years before, but I mean, it was still insanely popular at this time. And then favorite country new artist, the Dixie Chicks. They were becoming huge at this time. But sports, being January, not a lot going on of sports that I watched. I didn't watch basketball. But Michael Jordan retired for a second time. He'd come back in 2001 with the Washington Wizards, but by then he couldn't play at the top level anymore, and he kind of knew that, so that didn't last long, I don't think. But football, the Denver Broncos beat the Atlanta Falcons 34-19 in Super Bowl 33, and that was their second Super Bowl title in a row, and that was the one where John Elway retired after, went out completely on top. It was the first year of the BCS in college football. It was the Bowl Championship Series. Now they got a playoff, which, by the way, Ohio State just won. They beat Tennessee. So they're going on to face Oregon, who they lost to earlier this year. And hopefully we can get that national championship. Sucks losing to Michigan again. But anyway, back then they beat Texas A&M in the Sugar Bowl. And Tennessee beat Florida State in the Fiesta Bowl for the first ever BCS national championship. Okay. Not a whole lot going on there in sports, but in wrestling there was a lot going on. Being ECW had been in pay-per-views for a while now, they had a pay-per-view. First of all, New Japan has their big... I'm not real huge into New Japan wrestling. A lot of people that like wrestling are. It don't appeal to me, so... But Great Muta defeated Scott Norton for the IWGP Heavyweight title in their big Tokyo Dome show at the beginning of the year they always have. Just want to mention that in case there's people out there that like it. Cause I'm not crapping on it, it's just not my style. But ECW, they had Guilty as Charged. And, by the way, ECW, WCW, and WWF all had pay-per-views this month, all 1 week apart. This is how hot wrestling was. And people had the money, $30. Can't remember if it was $30 or $20. Some of them were 20, some were 30, but I mean, even if they're both 20, that's $60 at least a month you're paying in pay-per-views, and they were getting huge numbers. But anyway, ECW Guilty as Charged. the main event, Taz defeated ECW World Champion Shane Douglas for the title. And the following week, WCW had their... it wasn't one of their bigger shows of the year. It was kind of like WWF In Your House type level. But it was WCW NWO Sold Out. Chris Jericho with Ralphus defeated Perry Saturn in a loser wears a dress match. I put this down just because I can talk about Ralphus. I'll be talking about this idiot that, like this homeless guy that showed up at our New Year's Eve party. I'll be talking about that like either a 96 or 97 episode. It was with Marky Foes, so it wasn't this time, but we called the guy Ralphus because this, if you remember WCW, Chris Jericho was mocking Goldberg. Goldberg would come out with the security team, which I never got. If Goldberg is so big and bad, why does he need a security team around him? Are they trying to say he needs help? Or are they trying to say he's so popular that the fans keep trying to touch him? I don't know. Anyway, Jericho mocked him, and he had this fat guy who was actually one of their road crew, or he drove one of the semis. I can't remember which. He worked backstage. But I don't know what his real name was. It might have been this, but they called him Ralphus, and he had this half shirt. And it's this fat guy, and he had like snaggle teeth hanging down. But, oh my God, anytime this guy was on TV, me and Josh and Travis would lose it. But that's why I purposely put the results of that match down, so I can talk about Ralphus finally. But Rick and David Flair, his son, which David Flair's career didn't really pan out. But they defeated Barry Windham and Kurt Hennig, the West Texas Rednecks. Their song Rap is Crap. That song is hilarious. Look that up on YouTube. Rap is Crap. West Texas Rednecks. They're probably really from Texas, unlike that fake outlaw guy. Anyway, the main event, Goldberg defeated Scott Hall in a stun gun ladder match where he had to go up the ladder and get the stun gun. That was all because of the month before when Scott Hall used a stun gun on Goldberg to help Nash beat him to win the world title that ended Goldberg's undefeated streak. And of course, that would all lead. I should say before this pay-per-view, January 4th was infamous in wrestling, being known as the Finger Poke of Doom, where Nash and Hogan had been feuding. You know, they both had their different separate NWOs. You know, Nash had the Wolfpack, Hogan had the Black and White. Well, Hogan got his title shot and then just poked Nash in the chest. He fell down, and then Hogan pinned him for the title. I said before, it don't bother me as much as it bothers some people. Yeah, it was crap, and really, you know, one of the things that led to WCW's death, but there's people out there that swear that's what killed WCW. A lot killed WCW. That thing didn't. There were still people that watched after that. But, I guess Hogan was too good to show up for this pay-per-view. The world champion wasn't even at the pay-per-view. But going back to that January 4th show, because I like to mention title changes. Rick Steiner and Kenny Chaos had to vacate the WCW World Tag Team titles due to the Rick Steiner being injured. I don't even remember Kenny Chaos and Rick Steiner teaming up. But the tag team titles have been a joke for a while anyway in WCW. Because I guess while Kenny Chaos was injured at one point, Rick Steiner had Judy Bagwell, Buff Bagwell's mom, defend the titles with him. That shows how much of a joke those titles became. That, to me, would kill WCW more than the Finger Poke of Doom having Buff Bagwell's mom wrestle and be up on a pole. Vince Russo, idiot. Anyway, then the week following, WWF had their huge pay-per-view, Royal Rumble. And The Rock would beat WWF champ Mankind in an I Quit match. That match was famous for just the brutality. If you ever seen Beyond the Mat, the documentary, Mankind talks about it. The multiple chair shots to his head. I don't know how, like, Mankind's even still has a fully functioning brain today. I'm not even exaggerating. He hit him so many times. The Rock went overboard. I mean, Mankind told him to do it, but, you know, at the same time, Mankind was out of it, so it's like, how can you listen to a guy that's out of it? But it was known for brutality. The Royal Rumble was actually won by Vince McMahon. It was a whole thing with him and Austin starting out, and Vince would run out of the ring, because Royal Rumble, you had to be thrown over the top to get eliminated. If you go under the bottom rope or middle rope, you can still be in it. They do that a lot these days. Too much, I think. Where, like, oh, we threw everybody out, everybody's gone, and then the one guy, the slimy heel that snuck out, sneaks in and tries to sneak. They do that a whole lot these days. Like, too much, I think. But this is like a perfectly the way this whole Royal Rumble went. And then, of course, Vince didn't want to. The winner of the Royal Rumble gets a shot at the WWF title at WrestleMania, and Vince didn't want to face his corporate champion, The Rock, so he forfeited. It's like the only reason he did it is so Stone Cold couldn't win it. Well, the commissioner was Shawn Michaels, who had like officially announced his retirement, even though he hadn't wrestled in a year. He announced that if the winner forfeits, then the last person eliminated gets it. So it had been Stone Cold. So Vince was pissed. But Austin didn't just want the title shot. He wanted his hands on Vince in a match. So he agreed that if he lost the match, he would give up his shot. You know, Vince agreed to it, and it was a cage match at St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And that was definitely memorable. I'll talk about that more in February. But let's see. Anything else newsworthy of wrestling going on? Oh, yeah. Mankind ended up winning that WWF title back at Halftime Heat, which was a huge deal at the time. It was an empty arena match. They just filmed it with, probably before a show or something, and then aired it that night. It was Halftime Heat, so it was on during the Super Bowl. You don't want to watch I don't know what their halftime show was that year. Maybe I should start putting that in my Super Bowl reviews whenever I talk about sports. But they're like, you don't want to watch the boring halftime show? Flip over to USA Network. We got Halftime Heat, and that drew huge ratings. Of course, and that was the year they had that, and the year before they had WWF Super Bowl commercials. That was how big WWF was then. And of course, The Rock would end up winning it back the next month in a ladder match on Raw to set up that Stone Cold versus Rock iconic match at WrestleMania 15. And one other title change I see is Jeff Jarrett and Owen Hart defeated WWF World Tag Team Champions, The Corporation, which was a bunch of people, but the tag team champions were Big Boss Man and Ken Shamrock, and they won the titles on Raw. A couple other things of note. I talked about Japanese wrestling. Japanese wrestling legend Giant Baba died. If you're up on Japanese wrestling, that one of the pioneers of Japanese wrestling, Giant Baba. Jesse Ventura was sworn in as governor of Minnesota. That was a huge deal. Like a wrestler is in politics now. Like, way before Kane became mayor and all this other stuff, he became governor of a whole state, Jesse Ventura. And he's a little out there, but we finally had a wrestler in power. But one final thing about wrestling, the Andre the Giant biography debuted on A&E. A&E's known for their series biography. Well, I don't know if they're known for that now, but that used to be their big series. Anyway, they got the highest ratings at that time in A&E history. Did I say AEW at first? They're nothing more than basically a TV company run by an idiot. I shouldn't even say TV company. I'm surprised their TV company keeps them around. You can't tell I can't stand that company. If I said AEW, I meant A&E. But they got the highest ratings in A&E history. We're going to wind up this week on the Nickelodeon weekday lineup. I flop. Sometimes I'll do Nickelodeon. Sometimes I'll do Saturday morning cartoons. I'm doing Nickelodeon this week. In January would actually be the last appearance of two shows on Nickelodeon. Allegra's Window, which didn't last very long. It was kind of like a puppet show. I liked it. Just, it wasn't on very long to give me enough memories. And it was the later 90s, so I didn't have access to watch it as much. But Eureka's Castle, that's a classic one. They ended their series and then were off Nickelodeon after that. That was a sad time. I loved that show. Just so many memories of that. Magellan the Dragon and Batley the Bat. And of course Eureka herself. Not herself. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway. We're going to go to the Nickelodeon lineup. I don't look at this ahead of time if you've never seen these before, because I want to give my reaction on them. Some things, if I've talked about them over and over again, I'll I pass over them. It don't mean they're not important. It's just... Anyway, it looks like 6 o'clock. Cable in the Classroom. If you don't remember what that was, it was like an initiative from like the TV stations to get more educational programs on TV. And they would actually show some of them in the classroom. But this just says Cable in the Classroom. They had various shows. Like they had Mr. Wizard's World, Nick News. So it could have been any of those, but they usually start the day with those educational shows. And at 6:30, Real Monsters. We go from education to a show about a bunch of monsters at monster school trying to learn how to be monsters. Before Monsters, Inc. did it, there was Real Monsters. 7 o'clock, Garfield and Friends. Damn, what a classic cartoon that was. So many memories of that. And then next up, Tiny Toon Adventures. That was like the Looney Tunes gone insane. 8 a.m. Rocko's Modern Life. the craziest, dirtiest Nick cartoon that kids didn't know about. I say that because obviously Ren and Stimpy is known as the dirtiest, but Rocko's Modern Life had those jokes that kids did not get at all, but adults were like, oh no, they said that. Then 8:30, probably the biggest Nicktoon of all time, Rugrats. 9 o'clock. You're on Nickelodeon, Charlie Brown. I never watched this. That was Monday through Wednesday, and then Thursday and Fridays would be Maisie. I've never heard of that show. But I never watched the Nickelodeon version of Charlie Brown. I'm not really into Charlie Brown. If you see my Christmas episode, I didn't really care for the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving that everybody loves. It's just, I don't know. I find it boring. If you like it, that's fine. This is Nick Jr.'s hour, but by the way, they have it separated now. That started off Nick Jr. 9:30 Blues Clues. We just got a letter. And I was too old for Nick Jr., but I was still watching it. That's how entertaining it was. Little Bear at 10. Oh, I love that one. Read all the Little Bear books. Loved that cartoon. It was so wholesome, but it wasn't in the cheesy way that they have wholesome cartoons today that I think they're too cheesy and try too hard. This was just really good. 10:30 Franklin, never really watched it. 11 o'clock Gullah Gullah Island. That was one of those shows that came out around the time of Allegra's Window, but I always remember Gullah Gullah Island more. Oh, 11:30, one I haven't got to talk about before. The Busy World of Richard Scarry. Man, I love that cartoon. They had all these animals, and I remember the worm with the apple. But it was a book series by Richard Scarry, which is a weird name. You'd think the kids would be scared of it. Scary, but just it was like I said, the busy world. They were, all kinds, always getting up to stuff. There was the main characters. I think they were rabbits. I can't remember their names now. But man, there was just so much going on with that cartoon. It was fun. And then Little Bear again, Blue's Clues again, Eureka's Castle, which of course would leave after that month. Like I said, and Allegra's Window. Sad times. And then coming out of Nick Jr. for an hour, we have Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. Of course, you can't go wrong with Looney Tunes. An hour of Tiny Toon Adventures. Then getting into more Nicktoons, we got Doug. Great Nicktoon, which eventually would go to Disney. Rocko's Modern Life again. Cat Dog. I watched it a few times. It wasn't one of my favorites, but it was a funny premise. If you don't know what a cat dog is, it's this animal that's half cat and half dog. Like, at two ends, too. Like, I don't know where this thing pooped from, but we'll figure that out later. Speaking of figuring it out, I'm skipping ahead, but anyway, 5:30 was All That, the sketch comedy show like Saturday Night Live. I've talked about that many times before. Figure It Out, as I just said, it was a game show where they'd have, I've talked about it before, I keep saying that, but they'd have a panel of like celebrities, and mostly Nickelodeon celebrities, and they'd have people on there, and you got to figure out what they did to become famous, or just, even not famous, like something they invented. Secret World of Alex Mack, never really watched. Doug again, Rugrats again, and then we get to the Nickel-O-Zone. I don't remember that. It was their nighttime period. I don't remember the Nickel-O-Zone, like, being called that. But anyway, it had Hey Arnold on Monday and Wednesday. I've talked about that before. Not really a big Hey Arnold guy. And the Wild Thornberries really didn't like that one either. Tuesday and Thursday. And then Kablam on Friday. My brother Clint just called me. Do you remember Kablam? Like, yes. Like, we literally just talked about this. I'll have to send him a link to this. Clint called me about this because his girlfriend was talking to him about, do you remember Kablam? And he didn't remember. He's like, I bet Jason remembers. Yep, definitely. I don't have a lot of memories of it, but I definitely remember it being, because like I said, I didn't have a lot of access to Nickelodeon at this time. So if it's a newer show, I didn't really get much chance to watch it. Just like this, at any of Alan Strange, Monday and Wednesday. Don't remember it. Cousin Skeeter, Tuesday and Thursday. I never liked that one. And then Oh Yeah Cartoons, Friday. That was just a bunch of shorts, like, short cartoons. I love those type of shows where they're just random cartoons thrown all together. I remember watching a bunch of those in the early 90s. I can't remember if it was called anything or if they were just like show them during commercials. Just like little short cartoons. But yeah, just some fun stuff there. And then of course at 9 p.m. Nick at Night would start. And then till 6 in the morning, and then we started all over again. Yeah, but like I said, I was at Granny's at this time, so I did have Nickelodeon. It's just my interests weren't really with kids TV anymore. When I watch it, but like I said, weird time for me. Like now, with nostalgia kicking in and wanting to go back to this time period, I would go back and watch this stuff all day long. But in the late 90s, it's like, I didn't even turn it on, and so I don't know what was going on in my head. I wasn't on drugs or nothing. A lot of people, the teenagers, starting to experiment with stuff. I wasn't doing any of that at all. I wasn't drinking, didn't do any of that stuff. Just, I don't know. Changes. But if you're still watching after all this rambling, thanks for joining me for the podcast. It's been a fun one to do. Talked a lot. I can tell my throat's like, bleh, quit talking. I still got to do Jackasses of the Week video next. But next time it'll be like this. This episode came out a day after normal. I try to get them out on Wednesdays. Wednesday next week is New Year's Day, so I'm going to have this one come out this January 2nd. And we'll be talking about July 1991. It's my first trip into 1991 on the podcast. I was 7 at the time and just finished first grade. Well, not just finished, a couple months ago, but finished first grade, so we'll see what memories I can come up with that and see if we can come up with some stuff to talk about. But thanks for joining us, whether it's listening on Spotify, watching here on YouTube, Facebook. Thank you for your support and your feedback and comments. And if there's something you don't like, tell me too, so I can change it. Because, I don't want to be making these videos just for me talking to myself. I'm hoping you guys are enjoying it all. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90's never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.